In this lesson, we'll learn how we can start to use cloners together with multiple objects. Alright, so in our previous lesson, we've learned how we could start to use cloners to start to duplicate our certain objects. Now, what we can actually do is use cloners for multiple objects and actually have our scene populated really with the use of just a single cloner. So to take a look at this, let's start by just going up to MoGraph and let's drop in a cloner. Now, we've seen already how we can, again, just take a simple object and drop it into our cloner and then have that cloned out for us. Now, we can actually just take any objects that we want, and with all of those selected, we could make all of those children of our cloner. And now, if you look very closely, we can see that our cloner is actually duplicating all of the objects that are listed underneath it. So let's go ahead and I'll take my transformation or my positions here and start to expand these so that way we can actually see this. We can continue to dial up our count, and you can see how it is really just cycling through all of these different objects and kind of listing these out. So you can see it starts with a cube, then goes to this sort of a rounded shape, then to my torus. You can see that's the exact ordering from top to bottom that we have underneath our cloner, and it'll just continue to repeat this as many times as we specify. So if I go back to my cloner, we really have a few options as far as controlling the distribution and actually how this is occurring. So for example, we have the clones pull-down menu. By default, this is set to iterate, which gives us this effect that we see where it will cyclically come through and start to repeat these children objects in a very particular order. So if I were to take this cube and let's say I wanted this process to start with the torus, I can just take my torus, drop it up above this cube so that it's in the top of the list, and now you can see that's the starting point for my cloning process. So if we were to come back here and actually switch this, let's change it from iterate to random. You can see now Cinema 4D will come in and just for each one of these clones it will pick an object completely at random and use that to just populate this out. So good for getting, again, just sort of a randomized look, something that is maybe going to be used to populate our scene with a whole bunch of different objects. Now we can also come in and start to adjust our random seed. So for example, if we wanted to come in and maybe adjust this randomization just a little bit more, we have that capability here as well. Now in addition to random, we also have blend. Now blend, you can see, behaves a little bit differently. So it'll actually take our different objects and try to blend these together as best it can. So essentially what it's going to start doing is just look at the entire length of our cloning process and just kind of break this up according to our objects. So it's going to use the first object on our list, followed by the second object, followed by the third object, really kind of in a sequential order. So when you look at this kind of an output or this kind of a result, you might initially think that the name blend is sort of misleading. Well, that's really not the case. This actually does have the ability to blend. The key, though, is that we have to be blending with objects that all have the same topology. So, for example, we have this little rounded cube down at the end, and we have this little squared-off cube. Now, these two objects really are the exact same topology, and in fact, they were both built from cubes. It's just that this one has sort of a smooth deformation or a smooth deformer that was applied to it to kind of round this out. So if I were to take this torus out of this list and just leave these two objects that have the same overall topology, we can see that there actually is a blending that happens. So Cinema 4D is going to try its best to take our two objects and actually try to create some kind of a blend between those. Again, as long as we have the same objects with some kind of the same topology, this process should work really well. But really, the simpler the blend, the better your results will typically be. Now, in addition to the blend, we also have the sort mode. Now, the sort mode we're really not going to talk about in this particular course. This starts to get a little bit more complicated where we start to use additional effectors and things like that. So for now, we'll just focus on the iterate, random, and blend. These are the ones that you'll probably be using most frequently anyway. So let me actually set this back to iterate, and I'll plug in my torus once again, And I'll disable that checkbox or re-enable that so that way it does get calculated again. What I want to show you is this option down here for fix clones. So whenever we turn this on and off, you might notice just a very, very slight jump in my objects. Now, at first you may not really understand exactly what is happening, but really what you want to keep in mind is the fact that whenever we start to create objects or create any kind of a clone, typically an object's position will be completely overridden by the cloning process. So to demonstrate that, if I were to grab this torus, and with this selected, if I were to pull it over to the side, you notice that even though the torus is over here, as far as its original position goes, once this gets dropped into my cloner, the position of that torus is completely overridden by the cloner. So now it uses this cloner's position to reposition the torus. Now that's the effect that we'll get if we have our fix clone turned on. That means with this turned on, we will get this type of an effect where our objects are completely overridden by the clone itself. Now if I disable this fix clone, all of a sudden you can see that some of my objects move. Now with this disabled, now the cloner will actually keep in mind the original position of my object. So now I can still come back and have full freedom to come back, move my object to reposition it, and it should still factor in perfectly with this entire clone. And I can still come in, start to use things like the rotation, the scaling, and things like that to get whatever look that I really want to get. Alright, so really, really nice feature to have. Now, another thing that we might sometimes find ourselves in a particular situation where we might actually want to have several objects that are really being treated as one. So right now we have all of these 3 different objects, but let's say maybe we wanted this cube and the torus to really be together. Well, let's actually come back, and just a quick and easy way of getting this back is I'll just go back to fix clone, so that way everything jumps back into line. Now let's say that I had, again, maybe this cube and this torus. If I were to pull this out, maybe I wanted these to actually behave as though they're one. So let's come back, grab this torus. I'll try to align that back just a little bit better. Doesn't have to be perfect, just for the sake of demonstration. Now what I can do is take this torus and actually parent it or make it a child of this cube, so that way as I start to move them, they should move together. Now if I had this kind of a structure and then put that underneath my cloner, once the cloner comes to this object, it should now treat any kind of children and parents as one object. So now you can see that it's now taking this mixture of this cube and our torus, and now just slipping that into our whole cloning process. So this is something that, again, becomes really, really useful because let's say we had some kind of a situation where maybe we had a car that was built, but maybe we wanted to fill an entire parking lot with cars. We could just take all the parts of our car, parent them underneath some kind of an object, maybe a null, and then just simply take that and plug that into a cloner so it can now actually come in and replicate an entire car for us with one click. Okay, so that's a look at some slightly more complex uses for the actual cloner node and some of the things that we can do with this. So in our next lesson, we'll continue this process of exploring some of the additional features of this cloner.